Today's episode was sponsored by M over on Patreon. So thank you so much for your support, M. It honestly means the world to me. Because your initials were EMC, I thought it would be fun to go ahead and try to make your patch squared. Like the science thing. Unfortunately, that just kind of made the patch look janky, so for that I apologize. Hopefully it doesn't mean that you regret your decision to support me, but, well, all sales are final, so your move. But seriously, thank you so much, M. Why don't we go ahead and get your patch up on the wall? Yeah! Okay, so there it is. It might be kind of hard to see because weirdly, framing shots is the hardest part about making these things for me. I'm not very good at the technical aspects of this job. And yeah, if you would like to support the channel like M did, then please consider checking out my Patreon. You can find a link to it in the box below where all the words are. Forget what it's called, but I feel like you guys know what I'm talking about. And M, if you're watching this, then please remember to either cancel your Patreon subscription or go down to a lower tier. I messaged you, but I don't think you check your messages. And while I'm not above taking that much of your money, it does seem like this patch probably isn't worth the amount you will be charged if you stay at your current tier 2 months in a row. Actually, I probably shouldn't say that when I'm trying to get people to give me money. Your patch is worth everything. I'm bad at the non-technical aspects of this job too. Why don't we just start the show? Hello nitwits and welcome to Knitting Time with Willie. I'm your host Willie Muse, joined as always by my co-host Nitcolas, and today I'm going to do my best to try and keep things moving. Against my better judgment, I've been reading the comments, and one thing that keeps coming up in there is that a lot of people think that the introductions to my videos are way too long in a way that might be discouraging new viewers, which, well, that's not something that I want to do. I need new viewers. A lot of the viewers that I already have are starting to realize how annoying I am, and someone's going to need to take their place. And it is true, normally I do have these super long preambles to my videos, which probably are a little frustrating for a lot of viewers who just want me to get to the goddamn thing that they clicked in for. Like, truth told, if I was one of my own viewers, I would probably skip ahead past all of my early video ramblings too. I hate having to listen to my own thoughts. The idea that anyone would do it willingly is still quite perplexing to me. And normally, here is where I would go on a long diatribe about why I spend so much time talking in the introductions, but, well, that feels very counterintuitive. So instead, I'm just going to say that today we're talking about a bad movie, and then I'll jump ahead to telling you a little bit more about the specific bad movie we'll be discussing. Although actually, before I do that, I did just realize that I was so focused on trying to speed through this introduction that I forgot to put on my tiny mayor's hat, which is deeply embarrassing for me. So I'm going to put that on, and then after I do that, now I'll tell you a little bit more about the movie we'll be discussing today. This is what happens when you rush through things. As those of you who have been following this series already know, I am on a quest to find my own bad movie. I love talking about movies that are so bad they're good, but I also think that a lot of the fun of them is discovering new ones on your own, and so I'm on a quest to do just that. And when I was trying to think about what I should talk about this time around, I realized something. Even though I'm about a year into making this series where I'm trying to find my own bad movie, I never actually stopped to ask myself if I already have one. And after thinking about it for a while, I realized that I actually do. There is one movie that I haven't seen anyone else talk about that is so mind-numbingly terrible that I love it with my entire heart and soul. And in order to tell you guys more about it, I'm going to have to take you back to a simpler time when men were men, music was loud, and the entire country was united by patriotism as a war raged on overseas. I'm talking, of course, about September of 2006. It was around this time that I started to develop an interest in movies, but because it was still a relatively new hobby for me, I wasn't very good at it yet. I was a pretentious teenager, so I had decided at that point that I wanted to make good movies a huge part of my personality, but I didn't really have enough sense to figure out what constituted a good movie on my own. So instead, I turned to things like reviews and award shows to gauge what constituted high art, and as a result, I ended up forcing myself to base huge portions of my personality on some of the most banal pieces of filmmaking imaginable. I feel like if you were to ask me what my favorite movie was at this time, I probably would have said something along the lines of like Capote or something like that. And then if someone were to say that Capote is a weird movie for a 14-year-old boy to love, I would have scoffed, adjusted my beret, and said, "Oh yeah? Well, tell that to the Hollywood Foreign Press Association, fool." And this is all a long way of saying that when award season rolled around, my little antennae were on high alert for anything that might soon be my latest obsession. And so when I found out about this little film called The Black Dahlia, I was sure I had found my new favorite film ever made. Not only did it have an all-star cast comprised of Oscar stalwarts like Hilary Swank alongside exciting new up-and-comers like Scarlett Johansson, but it was also directed by Brian De Palma, so that meant that it had to be good. Granted, I had no idea who Brian De Palma was at the time, but I had heard film buffs talk about him in high regard, so that meant that I trusted him with my life. On top of all that, I truly believe that this movie has one of the single greatest posters in the history of cinema. I remember looking at this and being enthralled by it. It was so beautiful and so chilling and so mysterious that there was no chance in my mind that the movie it was leading me to could be anything short of magnificent. Every fiber of my being was telling me that this was an awards movie, and that meant that it was about to be my favorite thing ever made. As it turns out, though, every fiber of my being was dead wrong. Well, kinda. It wasn't completely shut out of the awards conversation. It did get nominated for the Academy Award for Best Cinematography. It also won the Alliance of Women Film Journalists Hall of Shame Award. So that's not nothing. Still, I was wrong about one thing, and that's that it definitely did not become one of my favorite movies. Although that said, the case could be made that it did become one of my favorite theater-going experiences of all time. When my equally teenaged friend invited me to see The Black Dahlia for his birthday, I was ecstatic. I couldn't wait to see all the mystery and intrigue of that beautiful poster stretched out into the length of a feature film. Unfortunately, that didn't actually happen, but I would argue that something even more special did. The movie started, and right from the get-go, all I could think was like, what the fuck is this shit? Granted, I didn't say that right away because all of my instincts were still telling me that this was a good movie, and since I trusted my own perceived idea about what film snobs would think way more than my own opinions, I wanted to do everything I could to try and see it that way before I gave up on it. Unfortunately, scene after scene of just the most baffling filmmaking you've ever seen in your life slowly wore away at my ability to give this thing the benefit of the doubt. And eventually, me and my friends just reached our breaking point. Once that happened, we just started to laugh. And know that when I say we laughed, I don't mean it like, I mean that we really laughed. We greeted every weird piece of 1940s slang and every unnecessarily over-the-top set piece with the deepest belly laughs we could muster, to the point that the only reason I can think of that we didn't get kicked out of that theater is that the 3 other people in there also hated the movie, and they thought that our obnoxious laughter made things a little bit more tolerable. Although that said, if you were in a matinee showing of The Black Dahlia at Mazza Gallery in 2006 and your viewing experience was ruined by a bunch of rowdy teenagers, then please know that I am deeply sorry. But yeah, I genuinely think that sitting in that movie theater was the most I have ever laughed to this very day. And to give you a better idea of just what I was laughing at, why don't I go ahead and break down the plot for you guys? Or at least try to break down the plot for you guys. Okay, so before I begin, I just gotta say that this is going to be the hardest movie summary I've ever had to give, because despite having seen this movie like 3 times now, I still don't entirely understand everything that happens in it. I feel like there's a chance that the movie is purposefully confusing as a stylistic choice, you know? It's a noir, so I feel like maybe they were trying to have the audience not always know what was going on in an effort to enhance the mystery of it, but well, if that's the case, then I feel like they overdid it a little bit, because I don't even think that I ever understand what the mystery here is enough for it to be mysterious. If that makes sense. Watching this movie kind of feels like someone is trying very hard to explain quantum physics to me, but they're doing it in Serbian. Like, I feel like maybe there's something interesting being conveyed here, but if there is, I'm so far removed from being able to understand what that is that it ultimately just ends up sounding like someone is speaking to me in a language that I simply do not understand. It doesn't help that a lot of this film's dialogue is literally in a language that I simply don't understand. The screenwriter is weirdly committed to using a lot of 1940s slang in a way that adds another layer to this movie's already impenetrable exterior, meaning that even if there was a clear story being told here in a coherent way, I'd still probably be a little bit confused, because every 3rd word is a weird old colloquialism that I have never heard before in my life. And this is all just a long way of saying that if at any point during this summary you feel confused in a way that makes you wonder if maybe somebody slipped you a large dose of ketamine without your knowledge, then please know that you are not in a K-hole. I am just describing the plot of this movie in a way that is accurate to what is on the screen. And with that out of the way, let's start this plot summary, shall we? As the title suggests, the movie tells the story of Elizabeth Short, aka the Black Dahlia, who was a very famous murder victim back in the 1940s, although it also doesn't tell her story at all. So that's weird. We begin in a locker room where Josh Hartnett is getting ready to enter into a boxing match. And right off the bat, that probably sounds pretty weird to a lot of you, because no part of what I just said has anything to do with the Black Dahlia murder. Josh Hartnett will eventually become the lead detective investigating the case, I think, and for whatever reason, the movie feels the need to give us a very in-depth explanation for how he got that job. And that explanation takes the form of a 20-minute long short film about boxing that is largely unrelated to the rest of the plot. Before you have time to wonder what boxing has to do with a movie about a famous Hollywood murder, we flash back to the Zoot Suit riots, because, well, this movie has never met a historical event that it didn't try to cram into its own plot. And it's here that Josh Hartnett meets his future boxing opponent and eventual partner, Harvey Dent. Both men were boxers before they joined the force, and so they show off their skills at fighting by fending off rioters.
I already knew him by reputation. Record down pat. A regular attraction at the Hollywood Legion Stadium. Lee Blanchard. 43-4-2 as a heavyweight. And he knew me. Dwight Bucky Bleichert. Light heavy. 36-0-0. Ranked 10th by Ring Magazine. Fighting no-name opponents in a no-man's land division.
And I know everything here is probably historically accurate because that's the kind of movie that this is, but watching two policemen go after a bunch of old-timey sailors while trying to arrest a guy in a zoot suit does make it feel like this film's costume department was just somebody who dropped $100 at a Spirit of Halloween store and was like, yep, I think my job here is done. After arresting the zoot suiter, the two men have a nice chat about boxing.
A nice left hook you got.
Well, you know, old habits.
Yeah. My girlfriend saw you fight a couple of times over at the Olympic. Said you were good. Said you were somebody.
And I show you that snippet only to demonstrate what terrible cops these guys are, because there is very clearly a car on fire behind them, and they simply cannot be bothered. I get that they're not firemen, but you'd think at the very least as first responders they could, like, throw a bucket of water on the situation or something. Harvey Dent tells Josh Hartnett that their superior is a fan of boxing, but he does it in the most 1940s way I could possibly imagine.
There's a Jew boy deputy DA over in Central Warrant, wets his pants for fighters, and he promised me the next spot he can wangle.
Like, I figured out what that sentence means based on context clues, but I do feel like there was probably a clearer way that they could have written that line. Also, I do just want to point out that casual anti-Semitism there, because it was the first of many, many times in this movie where I was genuinely unsure if we're supposed to think our protagonists are assholes, or if this movie was just made before 2020 when that sort of behavior wasn't a deal breaker for whether or not your character was likable. Whatever the case may be, though, after the slurs, we jump ahead to the police station, where we learn that the aforementioned superior has organized a boxing match between these two men in an effort to drum up support for an upcoming proposition. And, like, they mention this proposition a bunch throughout the movie. At one point, they even make a toast to it for some reason.
Toast. To Proposition B.
So I kind of assumed it was going to be something big and juicy, but now that I've watched it back, I've realized that it's about as boring as a proposition can get, and I don't really understand why they feel the need to keep bringing it up.
On Election Day, voters are going to be asked to vote on a bond proposal to upgrade the LAPD's equipment and provide for an 8% pay raise for all personnel. Keep in mind the examples of Mr. Fire and Mr. Ice. Vote yes on Proposition B.
I guess that there is something kind of nice about living in a world where they needed a heavily publicized boxing match in order to drum up support for an 8% increase in the law enforcement budget, because, well, I feel like nowadays they get that if a sheriff sneezes one too many times, but just because it's nice, that doesn't make it interesting, and I honestly don't understand why they spend so much time talking about it. I kind of think this whole boxing match subplot at the beginning is mainly meant to establish the world the movie exists in. Like, I feel like it's saying that LA is such a showy, image-obsessed town that even boring legislation requires a heavily publicized boxing match in order to get passed. But if that's the case, then it's a long way to go for that, especially since I feel like that observation has been made many, many times before already. The entire time I was watching this, I just kept thinking that everything this movie is trying to do, LA Confidential has already done a million times better. And keep in mind that I have never actually seen LA Confidential. I just have a vague idea what it's about, and that alone is enough for me to confidently state that the Black Dahlia is nothing but a cheap imitator. I also kind of feel like another movie that's being heavily copied here is Chinatown, but like again, if that's the case, then it's not being copied very successfully. It's been a while since I've seen Chinatown, but I do remember there being a lot of talk about municipal minutia in it, and it kind of feels like whoever made this movie thought like Chinatown had a lot of talk about local politics, and Chinatown was interesting, so that must mean that talking a lot about local politics will make this movie interesting too, but like, no, I don't think it works like that. Whatever the case may be, Josh Hartnett's boss really wants that proposition passed, and so he basically just decides that Josh Hartnett and Harvey Dent are going to box one another for politics. And like, Josh Hartnett doesn't want to do this, but he does it anyway because the boss is in charge of handing out promotions, and Josh Hartnett needs money. We learn that his father is suffering from dementia and needs to be put in an assisted living facility. And in a brilliant moment of show don't tell, the movie conveys this information by having the father run absolutely wild. I couldn't even begin to understand how difficult it must be to take care of an elderly parent. So I don't want to sit here and act like I know how anyone should handle that situation. But that said, I do think that the first thing that I personally would do if I were in Josh Hartnett's position would be to take the BB gun away from my dementia-ridden German father. That one kind of feels like a no-brainer to me. Although, to be fair, I do think the father is terrifying, so I probably wouldn't want to try to take his BB gun away from him either.
Guten Tag, Dwight.
English, Papa.
Englisch ist Scheiße! Amerikanisch ist Scheiße!
I don't want to sound culturally insensitive here, but I do find the German language deeply terrifying. That little interaction becomes a lot funnier when you realize that this is the only scene where the father speaks. That German outburst is like 90% of the character's dialogue, and I honestly love that for him. I feel like the actor knew that he only had one scene, and so he decided to chew the ever-loving shit out of it. And I think that that is one of the reasons I love this movie so much, because he is not the only person for whom that is the case. There are a lot of amazing one-and-done performances here, and I'm honestly very excited to share them all with you guys today. Still, for as much as I love him, I can't help but feel like the father character is pretty unnecessary to the plot of this movie. I mean, I guess I can't say that with 100% certainty because I'm still not entirely sure what the plot of this movie is supposed to be, despite the fact that I'm currently summarizing it, but you'll notice that it's called The Black Dahlia, and despite the fact that we're 15 minutes in at this point, we've yet to see a single dahlia of any color, so it does feel like the filmmakers could have cut to the chase a little bit harder. The point of the father character seems to be to explain why Josh Hartnett fought in the boxing match, and the point of the boxing match was to explain why Josh Hartnett became the cop who is investigating the Black Dahlia murders. But given the fact that this is a murder mystery, I feel like you don't really need an explanation for why there is someone investigating the Black Dahlia murders beyond like, I'm a cop and this case needs to be solved, so like, here I am. I think that the only time a film going this in-depth into a character's backstory is warranted is when it's to explain his motivations in some way, but here I feel like the opposite is true. Like, the whole point of this sequence seems to be to show us that Josh Hartnett wasn't really invested in his new job. It was just something that got thrust upon him, and if that's the case, then I feel like all you needed was a line where he says, like, I'm just doing this for a paycheck. Instead, they have included an entire 20-minute short film about boxing, which, well, that feels like a choice. And because it's kind of superfluous, I'm going to skip over most of what happens in this opening sequence in an effort to keep things moving. The only other part of the boxing subplot I'm going to show you guys is this little bit at the end, because I think it's a good example of this film's unique approach to choosing what information it chooses to show the audience. And it's a little bit graphic, so if you don't like violence, then skip ahead on the timestamp that I have hopefully remembered to include in the description below. If I forgot to include it, I'm sorry.
Give me a smile.
Okay, so for all you candy asses who skipped ahead, the clip I just showed featured Josh Hartnett getting his teeth knocked out at the end of the boxing match, and then it instantly fades to a shot of him getting fitted for a set of new false teeth, and like, I don't know, it just feels so weird to me that they felt the need to include dentistry here. Obviously, the point of that shot was that they didn't want their beautiful leading man walking around the entire movie missing his two front teeth like he's a 7-year-old who's about to strike gold with the tooth fairy, but it feels weird that they'd need to include an entirely new set and create what I have to imagine was a fairly expensive prop, all to explain something that could have been dealt with in like half a sentence worth of dialogue. As life has repeatedly reminded me, I am not a screenwriter, but I feel like if I were and I was worried that the audience would be confused about Josh Hartnett's teeth, I'd probably just throw in a line where someone says, "Your new teeth look great," and that would probably be enough to explain that. Although, truth told, I don't even know if explaining his teeth would be that high on my list of priorities, because one, most people already know that dentists are a thing, so they can probably just fill in the blanks there. And two, even if they didn't, the fact that he has teeth would still not be anywhere close to the most confusing part of the plot. And the fact that the filmmakers put in a lot of effort to explain them while glossing over much more confusing aspects of their movie feels like an odd choice to me. Watching this movie kind of feels like listening to someone who's really bad at telling stories try to tell you about their day. Like, they'll say stuff like, "Okay, so this morning I woke up and then I went to get a bagel and they asked me what kind I wanted and I said, 'Do you have blueberry?' And they said no, and so I said, 'Do you have onion?' And they said no, and then I said, 'Fine, just give me an everything bagel.' And they said, 'Okay, but what kind of cream cheese do you want?' And I didn't feel like picking because they had so many choices, so I said, 'Just give me plain.' And then I went out into the parking lot and I got mugged." And listening to them speak, you're just like, why did you spend so much time describing your bagel there? Clearly the mugging part of the story is what you should have been focused on. Are you okay? Josh Hartnett's bosses are extremely pleased with the boxing match, and so they promote him to detective, where he becomes partners with his former opponent, Harvey Dent. And it's not long before the two men strike up an extremely close friendship. In the previous section of the film, we also watched as Josh Hartnett became friends with Harvey Dent's wife, Scarlett Johansson, who he talked to a bunch while the two of them were training for their match. And so after a long day of work, Harvey Dent invites Josh Hartnett over for dinner.
Lee, heard something you ought to know. I was over at county parole, and Bobby DeWitt got an A number. He'll be released to L.A. in late January.
Thanks, Russ.
Who's Bobby DeWitt?
Old beef. Hot roast tonight?
As I'm sure many of you have already guessed, this leads to the three of them forming a throuple. I think that the movie wants us to see it as more of a love triangle where Josh Hartnett and Scarlett Johansson have feelings for one another and Harvey Dent is just oblivious. But the way that they portray it makes me feel like there's no chance in hell that Two-Face doesn't know what's up and isn't down with it on some level.
Tuss.
From November through the new year, Lee and I captured 11 hard felons, 18 traffic warranties, and 3 parole and probation absconders. After tours of duty, Lee and I would go to the house and find Kay. Sometimes she'd make dinner for us. Other times the 3 of us would go out on the town. Always she'd be there. Never between us, always in the middle.
I mean, I guess he could just be a very open-minded, hard-boiled 1940s detective / former boxer who's comfortable enough in his relationship that he has no problem with his wife holding hands with his heterosexual partner at the movies, but I feel like a much more likely explanation here is that this dude is down to clown. Like, at the very least, he wants a 3-way. In that clip I showed you earlier, Harvey Dent mentioned someone named Bobby DeWitt, and I included that because Bobby DeWitt is a very important part of the plot who pops up a lot. I have no idea who he is or why they keep talking about him, so I'm going to gloss over him for the most part, but he does seem important, so I feel like you guys should know that he exists. One person who you'll notice that I haven't brought up yet is the Black Dahlia, and the reason for that is that the movie takes a solid 25 minutes before it acknowledges her in literally any way. And truth told, even when they do finally get to her, they still kind of just put her in the back seat so that they can focus on other, much less interesting aspects of the plot. As a part of their detective work, Two-Face and Hartnett go to stake out some guy who did something. I don't know. There's a shootout, people are killed, it seems important, but again, I have no clue what's going on here. And yeah, they're sitting in a car waiting for some old-timey mobster to show up, and just by happenstance while they're there, this also happens in the background.
Out of here!
Okay. Fine.
Don't make me say it twice.
All right, we're going.
Make some money, man.
That right there was more or less the titular part of the movie. So the fact that they're actively trying to relegate it to the background, to me, kind of feels like the equivalent of if James Cameron had decided to set Titanic on the shore. One thing I wondered a lot while watching this was how differently it would play if it was called something other than The Black Dahlia, because I feel like it would be way more confusing. I don't know how that's possible exactly, but I do believe it to be true. Like, I feel like randomly injecting the Black Dahlia case into this movie 20 minutes in only makes sense because anyone sitting down was made to expect it by the way the film was packaged. I think that if the Black Dahlia of it all wasn't right there in the title, people watching this would see that clip I just showed you and be like, why is that woman screaming? I thought this was a boxing movie. It doesn't help that the murder is completely unrelated to everything that's happened in the movie thus far. Like, you'd think that they would eventually explain why the body was found just behind a building that the protagonist was staking out on the same day that he just happened to be there, but no. As best I can tell, it's just a coincidence. Although that said, nothing I say in this plot summary should be taken as gospel. I fully admit that there might be in-movie explanations for literally everything I was confused about. They just went over my head because this movie is absolutely impenetrable. You could probably tell me that this was actually about a zombie apocalypse, and while I'd say that it doesn't sound right, I don't think that I'd have the wherewithal to say without a shadow of a doubt that you're wrong. In any case, when the Black Dahlia is discovered, the film pivots from being whatever the hell it was before into being a more traditional, if still impossible to understand, noir film where detectives go from lead to lead trying to solve a case. And they start by interviewing the Black Dahlia's father, who seems less upset about his daughter's untimely passing than you might expect.
Detective Blaker, Mr. Short, this is Detective Blanchard. We would like to express our condolences for the loss of your daughter.
Yeah, I know who you are. Neither of you lasted around against Jim Jeffries. And as for Betty, she called the tune, she paid the piper.
She lived with you then?
I gave her the boot in July. Moved to Santa Barbara, sent me a postcard a couple of weeks later. Some soldier beat her up pretty bad. That's the last I heard from her.
I need 3 pigs and a blanket.
Keep your fucking panties on.
Was that soldier a boyfriend, Mr. Short?
Boyfriends? They were all her boyfriends. Long as they wore a uniform. See, Betty believed in quantity before quality.
Calling your own daughter a tramp?
I got 5 daughters. One rotten apple ain't so bad.
Okay, 2 things. One, is he magic? Because he seems to have manifested those pigs in a blanket out of nowhere. And 2, this part of the movie actually kind of bummed me out because it was the first time that I was reminded that the very confusing fictional story I'm watching is centered around a very real and very tragic event. And because of that, a lot of the less than stellar parts of it started to feel less so bad they're good and more extremely disrespectful. Watching that scene, I genuinely started to wonder if Elizabeth Short's dad was actually that callous. Of course, I didn't look it up because that's way more work than I'm willing to put into this shit, but I do feel like it doesn't really matter one way or the other because the film is not doing a great job of handling him, regardless of whether or not he was a dick in real life. The way I see it, either he was a horrible asshole who victim blamed his own daughter after her death, and the film kind of seems like it's on his side a little bit, or this is a complete fictionalization of a real person, and some poor dude whose daughter was murdered is being immortalized in film as an unrepentant bastard. Although that said, regardless of how morally questionable his inclusion in the film might be, I truly love the father because he is the second instance of a one-and-done character taking big swings. Although here his hook isn't screaming in German, it's making silly analogies to support how strong his alibi is.
I got an alibi just in case you think I did it. Tighter than a crab's ass, and that is airtight. They'll alibi me up tighter than a popcorn fart, and that's pretty fucking tight.
I get the crab ass one, but I genuinely don't understand why a popcorn fart would be considered tight. Comment below if you have any insights. The 2 men leave the diner, and Two-Face tells Josh Hartnett that he's going to put in a little overtime.
I'm sticking Nash's pad tonight. See if we get any strange drive-bys at the murder scene. Do me a favor, stop by and check on Kay, will you?
Yeah, sure.
And I'm sorry, I don't care what the movie says, there is no way that Two-Face does not have a cuckolding fetish of some kind. He clearly wants Josh Hartnett to bang his wife, and honestly, who can blame him? I can't say that this movie ever had me, but still, this is the moment that it managed to lose me even more than I thought possible, because here is where it makes the inexplicable choice of promoting Harvey Dent to the role of protagonist while simultaneously sidelining him for the entire rest of the film. I kind of feel like the thesis of this movie can be best summed up by this line that Josh Hartnett says during the boxing sequence, explaining why he's going to throw his match.
I'm not betting on me, Pete. Blanchard's the hero here. That's the way the story's supposed to go. I'm just the other guy.
I might be very wrong in saying this, but the goal here sometimes feels like it's to try and tell a story from the point of view of a hero who was never meant to be the hero. And if that's the case, then I'm sure that a legendary genius like Brian De Palma had reasons for making the movie this way that are very smart and well thought out. That said though, any brilliant artistic choices he may have been making here went way over the head of a non-genius like me, and it sometimes just ended up feeling like I was on the sidelines of an interesting story, watching a much more boring story play out. After that scene, Harvey Dent apparently becomes so invested in the Black Dahlia case that he has a mental breakdown, but we see absolutely none of that. And that's unfortunate because that sounds much cooler than what we actually see, which is Josh Hartnett dramatically resisting the urge to take a bath with Scarlett Johansson. In that clip I showed you when he leaves the interview with Short's dad, he seems perfectly sane and calm, right? Yeah, well that's why it's weird that the next time we see his character, Harvey Dent is doing this.
You gotta eat something.
Get this off the table! God damn it!
And honestly, the only reason we even know why he's throwing a hissy fit there is because ScarJo straight up tells us that the case is getting to him. And even with her saying that, I still wasn't entirely sure which case she was talking about. I had kind of assumed watching this that the thing he was so invested in was that Bobby DeWitt guy that he had mentioned earlier, because the movie sets him up as a threat to Two-Face's life, and based on that bath scene, he seems to have carved his initials into Scarlett Johansson, so it would make sense that he'd feel a level of pressure to try and keep the guy behind bars. I looked it up on Wikipedia though, and as it turns out, the source of his obsession is the Black Dahlia. They don't really explain why he'd be so consumed by it, and I still say that Bobby DeWitt would be a way better way to explain his breakdown, but that said, I trust Wikipedia summaries with my life, so this is the explanation that I'm going with. Which, yeah, if you want proof of just how dense and confusing this movie gets, then know that it's called The Black Dahlia, and it's about the Black Dahlia murder, and I still had to stop and be like, wait, what case are they talking about? While Harvey Dent is going crazy off screen, Josh Hartnett chases a lead by interviewing a woman who knew Short before she died, and I don't know this character's name, but she's dressed like a Cleopatra for some reason, and she is my absolute favorite part of the movie.
All right, first question. Does Lorna Mertz live here?
She used to. She skipped town this morning. But I'm holding the suitcase till she ponies up the back rent.
It kind of feels like the actress asked the director for advice on how to play the character, and then Brian De Palma just kind of described Mae West to her, but he did it through a game of telephone.
Short moved around quite a bit too, didn't she? Was anybody threatening her?
Poor Betty. The problem wasn't too many enemies, it was too many friends.
I gathered that. Okay, let's change the subject.
All right. How about the world of high finance?
Too many friends. I love her. By talking to this Egyptian lady, Josh Hartnett gets his next big lead, which is that before she died, the Black Dahlia hung out at lesbian bars. And that unfortunately means that this is the last we get to see of Sassy Cleopatra. Sassy Cleopatra would be a really good name for a drag queen. Before I move on from this marvelous character though, I do have to show you this one part because this is the scene that made me realize that The Black Dahlia was the craziest movie I had ever seen when I watched it in the theater all those years ago, and the image of this has been burned into my mind ever since.
I mean, I don't want to tell any tales out of school. But I do remember them being up on Hollywood Boulevard, speaking to this older woman. And she She was wearing a man's suit and had a man's short haircut. But it was just that once.
Miss Seddon, are you saying they were talking to a lesbian?
Your driver's here.
Like, I bet you didn't expect to see a pickup truck full of Cleopatras when you woke up this morning, did you? If you did, then you have very weird expectations. And not only is that just a weird image, but it's also very confusing because, like, I truly do not understand why they included that shot. Like, my best guess is that it was supposed to knock the sassy lady down a peg because she keeps talking about how she's this actress with a glamorous life.
How about the movies? You girls are all trying to break in, right?
Darling, I'm in.
But really, she's being towed around in the back of a pickup truck. But, like, I don't know, I feel like that still doesn't really explain anything. I still have many questions about that shot, but I think that my main one is just like, what the fuck movie is that? I have never heard of a movie requiring any more than one single Cleopatra. A truck full of them feels like a lot to me. But yeah, anyway, Josh Hartnett goes to investigate the lesbian bar, and just to make sure that the audience has no doubt about whether this bar is meant for lesbians, the movie includes a fully choreographed dance number by Katie Lang.
In their childish way, I know every type of love better far than they. If you want the thrill of love, I've been through the...
Excuse me, ladies, I'm sorry. I was wondering if you've seen this girl.
And like, I might be totally wrong here, but everything about this feels way more lavish than what I imagine lesbian bars would have actually been like during the time that this movie was set. I live in modern day Brooklyn, and I still only know of like 2 lesbian bars that exist within a 50-mile radius, and both of them look like Moe's Tavern. The idea that a bar catering specifically to lesbians would exist at all in the 1940s feels extremely unlikely, much less one that was apparently choreographed by Bob Fosse. Josh Hartnett doesn't seem to appreciate how good he has it though, because he ignores the show and instead asks around about the Black Dahlia, and this eventually leads to him coming across Hilary Swank, who is kind of like the femme fatale of this movie.
She wasn't the first Dahlia wannabe I'd seen, but she was the best. Was she the Les that Betty and Lorna knew? Or was she just some rich bitch with a taste for the lowlife?
Josh Hartnett follows Hilary Swank to her car and questions her about the case, and she says that she met Elizabeth Short a couple of times, but didn't really know her at all. As the interrogation goes on, it doesn't take long before we learn that Hilary Swank is actually a rich heiress to a man who basically runs all of Hollywood.
My father is Emmett Linscott. The Emmett Linscott?
Because of her social status, she's worried that news of the time she spent at a lesbian bar with a famous murder victim might somehow ruin her reputation were it to get out, and so she does what she can to make sure that that doesn't happen.
So, what do I have to do to keep my name out of the papers?
What do you mean?
That's not very convincing.
I don't need your daddy's money, if that's what you're saying.
You know it's not what I'm saying.
And this again was another one of those times where the morality of this movie felt very confusing to me, because Josh Hartnett totally takes her up on her offer of sexual bartering, and watching it, I genuinely couldn't tell if the movie was trying to portray its protagonist as morally ambiguous, or if it was just saying that blackmailing somebody for sex is totally cool because, well, a dude's got a bone. Hilary Swank tells Josh Hartnett to pick her up at her house tomorrow so that he can continue to take advantage of her sexually. But before they can get to that, Hilary Swank's wealthy Scottish father intercepts their plans and forces Josh Hartnett to have dinner with the whole family. And right from the get-go, it's clear that this family is up to no good. Like, the moment that Josh Hartnett enters their home, he's greeted with this charming little anecdote.
Who's this?
Balto. The paper is the LA Times for August 1st, 1926. Balto was bringing in the paper when Daddy found out he made his first million. He wanted to consecrate the moment, so he shot him.
And honestly, things only get worse from there. Hilary Swank's parents are so over the top and cartoonish that I feel like in a better movie, this scene would have been a red herring meant to make you suspect these guys while the real killer is still out there. But that's not really the case here because, spoiler, the family is the killers. Kinda. I don't know. If you're expecting a clear answer for who killed the Black Dahlia, then you have come to the wrong video, but the mom and the dad and Hilary Swank all seem to play a part, I think. But yeah, if I didn't suspect that these people were the bad guys my first time watching this, it's only because the movie lays the terrible on them so thick that it feels too obvious. Like, this is literally how the dad starts the dinner conversation.
What kind of a name is Bleichert? Dutch?
German.
Great people, the Germans. Hitler was a bit excessive. But mark my words that someday we will regret not joining forces with him to fight the Reds.
And honestly, there's a solid chance that he goes on to say way worse things after that, but if he does, I could not tell you because, full disclosure, I can only understand like 30% of the words that Scottish people say. At least it's not scary like German, though. Not to be outdone, the mother has a low-key mental breakdown going on a long class's monologue about how Josh Hartnett isn't good enough for her daughter.
Did you know, Mr. Leichhardt, that Ramona Boulevard is named after me?
I didn't.
When Emmett married me for my father's money, he promised my family that he would use his influence with the city zoning board to have a street named after me. But all he could manage was a dead-end block in a red light district in Lincoln Heights. Are you familiar with the neighborhood, Mr. Bleichhardt?
I grew up there.
Yes, well, then you'll know that Mexican prostitutes expose themselves from windows. I hear many of them know Mr. Linscott by name. I will sing for my supper when Mayor Barron comes to dinner, but not for Madeline's male whores. The common policeman, my God, Emmett! How little you think of me.
In a movie full of people hamming it up, absolutely no one hams it up as much as that woman. So, like, stay tuned because she has another real good scene towards the end. Not to spoil too much, but if you're not a fan of watching people randomly shoot themselves in the head, I suggest you skip it. For anyone who might be worried that this uncomfortable dinner means that Josh Hartnett won't get to coerce Hilary Swank into sexing with him, don't be, because after they eat, the two go to a dirty motel room where they bang.
You kept your name out of the papers.
Ew. After their whoopee session, Hilary Swank seemingly begins to trust her new sex partner, and so she opens up to him by giving him some new details on the case.
I didn't tell you all about Betty.
You didn't?
Don't be mad at me. Last summer, I heard about a girl who looked like me. I got curious. I left notes at a couple of places. Your lookalike wants to meet you, things like that. I left my number. She called. That's how I met her at Laverne's with Lorna.
And that's all of it?
Okay, first of all, creepy. I genuinely can't think of any message that would be more upsetting to receive than your lookalike wants to meet you. And not to victim blame, but it is not surprising to me that someone who was willing to respond to such a note was ultimately murdered. Second of all, I love learning that Josh Hartnett apparently leaves his fedora on during sex. I'm not sure if that's a kink or if the director was just worried that we'd forget he was a detective if we saw him without it, but it's a nice character detail all the same. That clip I just showed you is actually a very important part of the film because it informs us of the fact that in this world, Hilary Swank and the Black Dahlia look exactly alike. As best I can decipher, the fact that they look alike is central to the plot, and it feels to me like a very bold creative decision on the filmmaker's part because, well, they don't actually. Not even a little bit. We see a bunch of old film reels featuring Elizabeth Short over the course of this movie, and at no point was I ever like, wait a second. Was that Hilary Swank? Which, for the record, it is not hard to convince me that two people are the same character. I have spent full movies thinking that two people were one person just because they happen to have the same hair color, but here that wasn't really an issue. I honestly love Hilary Swank, and I think that she's probably the best part of this movie, but she also has a lot of unique features that definitely make her stand out in a crowd, so I do feel like if you're going to cast an actress to play her doppelganger, you kind of have to put in the legwork in order to make it make sense. Here they kind of just slap the same wig on another woman and seem to think that if they repeatedly told the audience that she looks exactly like Hilary Swank, we'd eventually just start to believe them, but unfortunately for them, their plan doesn't seem to work. More than anything, after a certain point, it just starts to feel like gaslighting. After his first tryst with Hilary Swank, Josh Hartnett stakes out this girl, dressed in full Donald Duck regalia, and apprehends her in what might very well be the least exciting police chase ever set to film. And like, I truly do not care to remember who that woman is or how she moves the plot forward, but I did want to make sure to show you guys that clip for the sole reason that despite the fact that she's basically running for her life at this point, she does not drop her ice cream cone. Truly a woman after my own heart. As the investigation rages on, Hilary Swank and Josh Hartnett continue to hook up in that gross little hotel room until one night when Hilary Swank decides to let it slip that she's been lying to her new boy toy.
I'm withholding evidence for you. It's a fair trade, but it shakes me. Are you sure there isn't anything you haven't told me about you and Betty?
Betty and I made love once, that one time last summer. I just did it to see what it would be like to do it with someone who looked like me.
Jesus Christ.
Alright, did not see that one coming, but honestly, I respect it. Josh Hartnett does not, though. He does not take this news very well, and based on the way he behaved at the lesbian bar, I'm inclined to believe that it's entirely because he is a homophobe.
Bucky, please stay.
You stupid slut.
Stay, sugar, stay.
Oh yeah, like you've never had the urge to find out what it's like to sleep with your own doppelganger. Grow up, Josh Hartnett. And like, I don't love the way that Josh Hartnett is slut-shaming Hilary Swank right there, but I do love the way that Hilary Swank responds to being slut-shamed.
Stay, sugar, stay.
Stay, sugar, stay. She sounds like Betty Boop mixed with Colonel Sanders. After storming off on Hilary Swank, Josh Hartnett goes to talk to Scarlett Johansson because, lest you forget, the two of them are still in the early stages of cuckolding Harvey Dent. And while they're chatting, Scarlett Johansson lets it slip that Actually, no. You know what? I can't do this anymore. Where did my tiny hat go? There are honestly so many important little details in this movie that I feel like if I were to try and properly summarize the plot, we would be here all day and you guys still would not have a single idea what the fuck I was talking about. With that in mind, I think I'm just gonna skip ahead to the end. So like, basically all you need to know is that Harvey Dent dies by falling headfirst into a fountain, and Josh Hartnett figures out that Hilary Swank's family was behind every bad thing that has happened up until this point. Josh Hartnett breaks into the Scottish father's mansion for one final showdown, and because this is a Brian De Palma movie, I feel like a lot of people watching this might still be holding out hope for one final bombastic scene that ties the whole thing together. Instead, they get this.
I don't want to go to Europe.
One of my foremen said the goddamn pipes are spewing gas. There'll be hell to pay. It's about time I showed the three of you good old Scotland.
I don't want to go to Europe, Daddy. You're always talking about how dreadful and provincial it is.
Yeah, but it's got what you need, Lassie.
What is that, Emmett?
Okay, I have a lot of pet peeves when it comes to movies, but I think that number one on my list might be unnecessary implied incest. Granted, I didn't even really know that it was one of my pet peeves until just this moment, because most movies have better sense than to include it, but now that I've seen it here, it has easily jumped to the top spot. After interrupting that charming daddy-daughter kiss, Josh Hartnett holds the two at gunpoint where they start to explain the central mystery of the movie in excruciating detail. And like, I'll show you what they say, but fair warning, despite the fact that I've been giving you what I think is a fairly in-depth plot summary, not one of you will understand a single word that they are saying.
Georgie did it!
Oh, that's rich. Blame it on the poor dead gardener.
No, Bucky, it's true. Believe him.
Oh, right. Josh Hartnett's name is Bucky. I don't know if I mentioned that yet. Stupid name.
Georgie was always sneaking around Daddy's properties. He saw them make the movie and he got crazy about Betty.
More. There's so many pretty things here, Emmett.
All right. Betty had called, short of cash as usual. I put Daddy on and he offered him money to date a nice man he knew.
You must have known he was a sick fuck then.
Oh, he was passive. I mean, he liked to touch dead things. I mean, his father was a surgeon. Did you know that? Famous in Scotland. I mean, we didn't know he'd go crazy like that.
You did him enough damage to him, and now you let him go!
Okay, I'm not gonna lie, I am always happy to see the crazy mom character enter a room screaming, but I do feel like punctuating a very long, boring exposition dump with someone yelling liar is a weird choice. Like, are we not supposed to believe everything the incestors just said? Because if that's the case, then, like, why did you make me watch it? You've stolen precious moments of my life from me, Scottish dude, and I would very much like them back. That said, though, the mother is definitely one of my favorite parts of the movie, so if listening to a boring Scot is the price I have to pay in order to watch her speak, I will happily do it, because this monologue that she gives is absolutely masterful.
How did Emmett damage Georgie? What did he do to make him go so crazy?
Who made what made who crazy?
It was Madeline.
Okay, I have no clue who Madeline is.
She was 11 years old. And she looked just like Georgie.
Ramona!
Shut up, Emmett!
Thank you! Somebody finally said it, Jesus. I love this woman.
That's right, officer. George and me. Not that Emmett cared about that. But he was her father. And for that, he ruined Georgia's face. When he got out of hospital, I gave him the Hugo book as a present. He had worked construction on that movie with Emmett. It was always one of his favorites. That's right. My book. My picture. My Gwynplaine.
What about Betty Short?
Well, that was the cruelest joke of all. He was obsessed with her, you know that?
The mom basically explains that her lover, who up until this point was so incidental to the plot that I did not feel the need to mention him, was obsessed with Elizabeth Short, and so the mom decided to ruin her face and kill her because of Madeline. Who again, no clue. Alright, I'm looking it up now, and apparently Madeline is Hilary Swank's name. So, not entirely sure how I missed that. So it seems like a pretty important part to have completely gone over my head. Although, actually, I think that knowing that key piece of information does kind of make me understand what's going on here a little better. I think that the mom's gardener lover was Hilary Swank's biological father, and so the fact that he was obsessed with Elizabeth Short drove her mad because he was unknowingly attracted to someone who looked exactly like his own daughter, and so the mom put a stop to it by committing murder. That's my best guess at what was going on there, and it kind of makes sense. Although that said, I do feel like if incest was that big of a trigger for the mom, she probably should have put a stop to whatever was going down on those stairs a few moments ago. Granted, at least now we know that Hilary Swank and her dad aren't related by blood, but still, it's creepy. And again, that's just my best guess. I might be very wrong because, like I said, this movie could have replaced all of its dialogue with interpretive dances, and I still would not be any more confused by what's going on than I already am. But whatever the case may be, after revealing whatever it is she just revealed, the mother takes one last big swing, putting a very strange cap on what was already a very strange movie. And, like, just to remind you guys, skip ahead here if you don't like violence.
We'll ruin you in court, you know that. Never what? Some little slut.
And yeah, that's basically the movie. After that, Scarlett Johansson and Josh Hartnett honor Harvey Dent's memory in the most respectful way imaginable by falling in love with one another and finally having sex like he clearly always wanted when he was still alive. Also, Josh Hartnett takes it upon himself to kill Hilary Swank in the same motel room where they once made love.
You'd never shoot me. Don't forget who I look like. Because that girl, that sad, dead bitch, she's all you have.
And like again, I think that the movie thinks that this is a heroic act, but it really just kind of feels like murder to me. Whatever the case may be, though, end of film. Very much so, yes, it's the worst movie ever made. Although that said, it might also be a masterpiece. Brian De Palma obviously has his ups and downs as a director, but I also think the guy has proven himself enough for me to say that he knows what he's doing. And so there's part of me that does still kind of want to give this movie the benefit of the doubt. Like, I do think that whatever movie he had in his head was very good. I just feel like that very good movie did not translate to my own personal brain. Like I said, there are a lot of huge swings being taken here, and to me, they read as insane and bad, but I would fully buy that they were actually a bunch of bold creative choices that just completely went over my head. I absolutely got the sense that this movie was doing its best to comment on a lot of interesting themes, and I feel like there's a good chance that if someone explained to me why it did some of the things that it did through that lens, I'd probably be like, oh, okay, I get it now. That's actually pretty cool. I think I'd almost put them in a category of movies I see a lot where they're bad in English, but if they were foreign films, they'd be considered art. Like, my best example of a movie like this is the entirety of the Purge franchise, because I don't think that they're good, but I do think that if those motherfuckers came out of Argentina, there would be a lot more film nerds dissecting every single frame of them. And I think that the same thing could be said about the Black Dahlia too. Like, I feel like if this were in another language, then a lot of the weird choices wouldn't translate, and some of the more over-the-top parts might be chalked up to cultural differences in a way that would allow people to focus on the themes a lot more. Like, I could honestly see myself enjoying this movie if we were discussing it in a college class. I just would never want to watch it again in my own personal life in any capacity that wasn't to make fun of it. Or maybe I'm giving it too much credit and it's just terrible. Yes? I think so, but it's hard to say. This movie is a lot. It's long, it's dense. After a certain point, it starts to feel like it's drilling a physical hole into the side of your skull. But that said, there are also a lot of so bad they're good moments buried throughout. So, I don't know. It might be worth it for some of you. There's a lot that happens in this movie that I couldn't even begin to touch on. So if you like what you saw in this video, then I highly recommend you go and check out the whole thing. Just know that it will be an undertaking. I feel like it's kind of like the bad movie equivalent of a James Joyce novel, you know? It's not going to be a breezy read, but if you can make it through till the end, then odds are you'll find it pretty rewarding. At least I think that's what a James Joyce novel is like. I've never actually read one. I'm pretty sure I'm illiterate, so it's a little bit above my reading level. We're about 6 hours into this thing at this point, so I feel like anyone who's still watching will not be turned off by me rambling too much. And so with that in mind, I feel like now is the time for me to give that long speech that I wanted to give at the beginning of this video about why I usually spend so much time at the beginning of my videos giving long speeches. And basically, it's because I'm nervous. I'm nervous that I'm going to do something wrong. I'm nervous that I might offend people. I'm nervous that my words might combine poorly with one of my viewers' mental illnesses and I might accidentally inspire a horrible killing spree like I'm Charles Manson. But more than anything, I'm nervous about how I'm going to be perceived. Making these videos, I have become hyper aware of just how many eyes are pointed at me and the fact that each one of those eyes is attached to a brain and every one of those brains is firing all sorts of neurons, I think. I don't really know enough about brains to say for sure that firing is the right verb to use there, but it felt right, so hopefully. And like some great big biological game of telephone, I put myself in front of the video camera and that becomes a video. And then that video goes through people's eyes and then travels into their brains and then the brains do whatever verb brains do to neurons. And at the end of all of that are these things called thoughts. And as we're all well aware, the thoughts that end up in people's minds don't always match up with what's right in front of their eyes. in the fraction of a second it takes to travel that long journey I just described, things become distorted and altered, and key pieces of information get lost along the way. It happens with everyone, and to me it is genuinely quite terrifying. And that, in a nutshell, is why I talk so much sometimes at the beginning of my videos. I want to make the image of myself I'm trying to portray to you guys as clear and detailed as I possibly can, because I feel like if I do that, then maybe it will mean that whatever fucked up distortion of that image eventually makes it into y'all's minds will retain enough of that information I projected out into the world that it can still be recognizable. I know it can be boring and unnecessary, and worst of all, I know it has the potential to turn off new viewers, but I still want to make sure I say everything I feel I need to say so that you guys know everything I'm thinking and everything I'm feeling and everything else that might not otherwise come across unless I say it, because, well, I'm genuinely putting myself out there when I make these videos, and I want to make sure that the self I'm putting out there is as true to the self I think I am as possible. I've been trying to cut down on unnecessary exposition in my videos for a while now, but it's honestly really hard because I can never shake the feeling that the things I cut are going to end up massively changing the end results of the thing I'm trying to make in a way that I don't want. Editing my scripts can sometimes feel like I'm blindfolded with a pair of scissors and a jumbled pile of clothes, and I know it's too hot outside for me to wear the clothes as they are, so I can either be a sweaty mess or I can cut some random holes in the cloth to let the air in. And like, who knows, maybe those holes that I cut will make things all nice and breezy for me, but there's also a chance that I just cut a hole where my genitals go, and if I go outside wearing them, I will end up on the sex offenders registry, and I honestly won't even really know what's what until I put the clothes on my body and walk outside for the whole world to see, and pray to God I don't hear anybody screaming. This maybe isn't my most artful analogy to date, but hopefully it got my point across. I'm sorry I made you guys picture my genitals. But yeah, I guess that this is all just an extremely long way of saying that I'm just trying to be cautious, because sometimes it's better to stay a big sweaty mess than accidentally leave yourself exposed. And while I don't think that there's anything wrong with being cautious, after watching this movie, I feel like I at the very least might need to switch up my tactic a little bit, because if there's one thing that I've learned from the Black Dahlia, it's that saying more doesn't necessarily mean that things are going to be clearer. This movie tries to convey more information than just about any movie I've ever seen in my life, and the only thing that information serves to do is to turn it into an incomprehensible lump of a thing. It obviously had a very clear idea what kind of movie it wanted to be and how it wanted to be perceived, but I feel very confident in saying that despite its best efforts, it didn't really manage to get that idea across. Like I said, I do honestly think that the movie that existed inside of Brian De Palma's mind was a genuinely good one. It's just that once he put it out into the world, it was hard to see any of his intentions once they were buried deep beneath a pile of big swings and 1940s detective slang. And it's weird because I don't know what this movie could have done differently to have been any better. I think there's a good chance that this is the good movie that existed inside of Brian De Palma's brain that just wasn't ever going to come across the way he wanted, because even if you do everything you need to do and say everything you need to say, you still can't control the way people are going to perceive the things you put out into the world. The one thing that I couldn't stop thinking about while I was watching the Black Dahlia was the Black Dahlia herself. Buried beneath the over-the-top acting and baffling plot points that make up this movie was an actual tragedy that happened to an actual woman in a way that, like I said, kind of bums me out. I guess I can't speak for Elizabeth Short here, but what I do know is that if I were a murder victim and my life was commandeered for the sole purpose of making this terrible movie, then I would absolutely come back and haunt the shit out of Brian De Palma. Especially because they do not treat her well here. At best, she's treated like a MacGuffin whose only purpose is to drive the plot forward, and at worst, she's treated in a way that is genuinely disrespectful. The way she's depicted for most of the movie is as a sort of fame-hungry dum-dum who kind of learned the hard way that she needed to be careful of what she wished for.
How long have you lived here?
2 years.
Lost your accent.
Yeah. Well, you know, when in Rome. Why, are you looking for a girl with an accent?
No, that's all right.
Because I can just bring it back like that. Because I'm a whiz with accents, and I basically do every accent in the world.
We don't really need an accent, thank you.
Because I can be from anywhere.
Okay. Let's hear that Boston accent.
Now?
Yes.
No, I can't do it now.
In the movie's defense, I guess that's not the only time I've ever seen something try to paint Elizabeth Short in this way. I've actually seen a lot of things about the Black Dahlia, and just about every single one of them seems to have a massive boner for the idea that here is this struggling young actress who wanted to become the most famous face in Hollywood, and then she did. By being murdered. Whoa! I don't know. And look, in every filmmaker over 50's defense, I get it. I do think that that's a big part of the story here, but I've also seen that depiction so many times that I can't help but think about how there's also got to be so much more to it than that. When I watch this movie, I can't help but think about Elizabeth Short sitting up in heaven watching it too, yelling at the screen like, how are you going to make an entire movie about me and not once mention how much I loved mint chip ice cream? That was a huge part of my personality. Oh my God, why are you still talking about those cuts on my lips? I had them for 10 seconds before I died. They were not a big part of my life. Talk about how good I was at Monopoly. The key is buying all the railroads. But that's kind of the thing with her. She was this beautiful person who had something deeply ugly happen to her in a way that didn't make sense to a lot of people. And because of that, they did their best to make sense of things. An entire nation of people looked at every picture of her they could get their hands on and read every article about her that they could. And that information went through those people's eyes, and then it traveled into their brains, and then the brains fired neurons, and at the end of all of that were all of these thoughts that were created about Elizabeth Short. And it kind of sucks because I feel very confident in saying that not one of those thoughts was a 100% accurate perception of who she actually was as a person. Which, speaking of Elizabeth Short, I don't think that it's an accident that a lot of you might know about the Black Dahlia and still not know that that's her name. And that's because when we talk about her now, we're not really talking about Elizabeth Short. All of those thoughts I talked about earlier created this mysterious, larger-than-life thing called the Black Dahlia. And though I've been using the two names interchangeably, I don't think that's the same thing as Elizabeth Short. The former is the idea of a person created by the perceptions of those around her, and the latter is the actual person. And weirdly enough, though they aren't all as pronounced and dramatic, I think that most of us have our own version of the Black Dahlia that we all have to deal with in a way that's really, really scary. One thought I had constantly while watching this movie is that if someone were to set the story in the modern day, I have no doubt that Elizabeth Short would have been portrayed as a fame-obsessed social media influencer. And as I thought about that, I couldn't help but think about how much has changed since then and how we all have to deal with way more exposure to the public than they ever did in the 1940s. I don't want to sound like an old fuddy-duddy here, but technology has forced us all to put ourselves out there to such a degree that it can sometimes make us feel like everyone is focused on us tighter than a popcorn fart. I decided I liked it, so I'm going to start saying it. And it's scary, you can never know what's going on inside one person's head, much less the heads of literally every person who has ever perceived you in any way, ever. And normally, here is where I try to be hopeful and say something along the lines of you have nothing to worry about, or the stuff you're afraid of is only in your head, but I can't really do that because the fact is that there's a good chance it's in other people's heads too, and if it is, there's literally nothing you can do about it because like I already said, you can't control how other people perceive you. Like I said earlier, against my better judgment, I have read my own comments many times, and let me just tell you that it's not just the length of my intros that people don't like. I can tell you from personal experience that there are a lot of people out there thinking the worst of my fears and then some. People hate me and my voice and my face and all sorts of other things I never even considered, despite the fact that I spend a good chunk of my day trying to think of new things people might be thinking about me. Most of the time it's not even mean-spirited. I get a lot of comments that are just like, wow, I think it's so inspirational that you're putting your stuff out online even though you look like a gumdrop and clearly have no clue what you're doing. And it's just like, cool. Thanks, I guess. The version of me that exists in a lot of people's heads is not a version of me that I like, and so I do my best to try and control the uncontrollable and change their perceptions. And unfortunately, this usually means that I just end up changing myself. I say more than I should, or less than I want, or I hold back emotions, or do stuff I wouldn't normally do, all in the hopes of making the thoughts about me that exist in other people's heads line up with the me I want them to perceive. And saying it out loud, it really does feel like a lot of work for nothing because I know it doesn't work. I mean, maybe it does sometimes, but there are always going to be people who have thoughts about me that I wish they didn't, and it really sucks. I wish there was something more I could say about that, but I really can't. It just sucks. People are going to think about you what people are going to think about you, and even though a lot of those thoughts are going to suck, you're absolutely helpless to do anything about it. Sorry. Although I guess hearing myself say that out loud, it does feel like kind of a bummer way to end the episode. And so to make sure that I didn't just have you guys sit here for this long ass video only to leave you depressed, I do want to try and give you some of that hope stuff I talked about earlier. And really I think that the best I can do in that department is to remind you of what I've already said, which is that though they might often seem similar, perceptions and reality are not the same thing. Elizabeth Short is not the Black Dahlia. This is not a pipe. And you are not what other people think about you. It sucks knowing that there might be all these thoughts flowing all around you that you can't control, but if you can figure out how to accept that ultimately those thoughts don't really mean anything, then you can actually start to focus on the one thing you can control, and that's yourself. Rather than worrying about the person people think you are, focus on doing your best to be the person you want people to think you are, because ultimately, that's all you can do. And if you manage to do that and be the you of your dreams, does that mean that everyone will eventually see it? Hell no, but at least you're the you of your dreams. You can do everything in your power to try and alter people's perceptions of you, but ultimately they're just gonna see what they're gonna see, so why not focus on the things that actually matter? After all, you can have the greatest movie poster in the world, but that doesn't mean that the movie's going to end up being any good. And yeah, that's my video. Please like and subscribe and share, and maybe subscribe from another account if you have one. I've actually started to see my subscriber count go down in the past month, so would like any subscribers who are willing to subscribe. Also, thank you again to M for sponsoring this episode. If you'd like to be like M, please head down to my Patreon. I'll be perfectly honest, it doesn't come with that many perks, but it does help me justify making these videos. So if you like them and want to see more of them, that's the best way. That's the best way to do it. You can also support me by buying my merch. Like if you like this sweater, then it does come in a t-shirt form. So that's what that looks like. This collar has been a dickie this whole time. Sorry to ruin the illusion, but there are a lot of fun shirts, and they're available downstairs. But yeah, that's the video. I look like a mess right now. This is a terrible way to end it. Whatever. Actually, never mind, I take it back. The episode's not over yet. I still have to do everyone's favorite part of the episode, which is posing for a thumbnail while the names of my patrons scroll. So I'm going to do that now. And like, I think I'm just going to do the poster because it's a really good poster. And I think the general theme of this episode is going to be what the fuck. So I think I should convey that in my thumbnail, so it'd be like, what? I do kind of want to, I think I need to make it sort of to the side, like, because I'm trying to think. So this, like, if this is the Black Dahlia, then this is probably her nose. So I want to get the mouth. So I should probably stay center, actually, but I should be as, like, thin as possible, which has never been my strong suit. So it'd be like, what? And then maybe since it's a detective novel, I should smoke the pipe that I have, so. Oh, maybe if I smoke the pipe and scratch my head, like. Should I take up smoking a pipe? I don't like tobacco, but I think this suits me, like. Although it's weird like being confused and smoking a pipe at the same time. I feel like people who are smoking pipes have it all figured out. So if I just do. I'm probably not going to use the pipe. One more of just like, what? I feel like, maybe what? I don't know. Maybe I'll just use a picture from one of my other videos. We'll see. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.